Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about the newest Chronicled Wish banner that is coming in version 5.6. In fact, Genshin Impact just announced that in the next patch, version 5.6, the Inazuma Chronicled Wish will be available, featuring a cast of exclusively limited 5 stars, no characters from the standard banner, really only limited 5 stars, and so I want to give you guys my thoughts on this banner and also the Chronicled Weapon banner, which features their signature weapons, with some of them being actually very interesting, and my overall thoughts on these banners and how worth it they are. Now, before we get into the individual characters and weapons, here's some initial information and important disclaimers that you need to keep in mind. Firstly, even though these banners can seem very appealing, it is important to understand how they work, namely that they do require intertwined fates, which are the limited pulls, and your pity, while it will carry over from Chronicled Banner to Chronicled Banner, will not carry over to other banners, namely character rate-up banners or weapon banners, really just the Chronicled banners themselves. What this means is that if you don't have enough pulls to guarantee 5-star character, and maybe you build up some pity but don't get a 5-star, then your pity will only be saved for the next Chronicled banner whenever that comes. And obviously, because these banners are kind of sporadic, there's no real predicting when that will be. So definitely do keep that in mind if you don't have enough pulls to guarantee a 5-star character. With that said, the way these banners work are that you can choose a specific 5-star to pull for, and if you lose your 50-50, you will get another one of the 5 stars on the banners. This means that if you are choosing a character, for example, and you lose the 50-50, you are guaranteed another limited 5-star character. You can't get anyone from the standard, which can be valuable to your account if you want multiple characters, or less valuable if not. So keep in mind that that is definitely an upside of these banners, but there are definitely some downsides as well, like the unique pity that I mentioned earlier, and also the fact that for weapons, the pity still remains the same to my knowledge of 90 compared to the normal weapon banner, which has a pity of 80. With that said, obviously it's all limited 5-star weapons, so that is definitely an upside. Additionally, it is worth pointing out that the odds of you getting the specific weapon you want is going to be 50-50, whereas on a limited weapon banner, while it is 50-50 between the two weapons that are on the banners, there is also a 75-25 chance of actually getting one of the two weapons on the banner in the first place, meaning that your actual chance for getting one specific weapon that you want is going to be 37.5% for your first 5-star. Because of this, while limited weapon banners do have their advantages, like having a bit of a lower pity and also the chance of having two rate-up weapons that might be better for you, especially because a lot of the times I would only really recommend pulling on a weapon banner if you want both of the rate up weapons. If you only want one specific one, then the Chronicled Wish can actually have better odds in that regard. And if you lose, you're also guaranteed a limited 5-star. Lastly, keep in mind that while you can't get any non-limited characters or weapons in these banners, what is good for you and what is useful for you and your account will vary from player to player, so think before you spend your Primogems. I don't want anyone to feel baited or anything. I'm trying to include as many disclaimers as I can, but with that said, let's now talk about the specific characters and weapons that are featured. So firstly, for the characters featured on the Chronicled Wish banner, let's actually go in order that they were showed on the live stream. So firstly, there's Kamisato Ayaka. Ayaka is a cryo main DPS who's typically centered around the freeze reaction, which is one that seems to be getting a huge buff in the next patch with the release of Escoffier. Now, even just from the dev stream, we already know that Escoffier is a character who will do a lot of things in one. Firstly, based on how many Hydro and Cryo characters you have in your party, she will decrease the resistance of both Hydro and Cryo, naturally amplifying the damage of your freeze teams, probably by a lot. On top of that, she deals off-field Cryo damage, and crucially, she also provides you with healing. This allows you to replace the healer slot in your team that you would otherwise need, and allow you to run a more offensive option. For freeze teams, this means no longer having to run a healer like, say, Kokomi, and being able to run a more offensive character like Farina, who can give you damage and buff your team, and whose HP drain will be offset by someone like Escoffier, although we still don't know exactly how strong her healing is just yet, so stay tuned for my guide on her once she's out. With that said, all signs point towards Ayaka getting a considerable buff if you plan on getting this character. Because of this, if you're someone who likes Ayaka and likes freeze and plans on getting Escoffier, then she's a DPS who can be a great option for you. While even just as of right now, she's a character who is genuinely a decent damage dealer in freeze teams, especially with her premium support options, one who gets better with vertical investment and is especially good in content where freeze is strong, so against non-boss enemies that are freezable, where Ayaka can really shine and be a solid DPS. Outside of that, because a lot of the abysses do feature a lot of unfreezable enemies, Ayaka or freeze teams more generally can feel a bit hit or miss, but once again, with a Escoffier who will give you buffs even against enemies that can't be frozen, I do think Ayaka will be a lot more relevant as a DPS if you like her and are interested in her, which can make her a strong DPS if you are looking for one through this banner. Keep in mind though that as far as DPSs go, their playstyle and who you enjoy matters a lot, so do keep that in mind. Additionally, worth pointing out a few things. Firstly, I do suspect suspect that if you are fighting bosses and are running Escoffier to still get buffs and kind of play a freeze team against enemies that can't be frozen, the Maréchaussée Hunter set can be a solid alternative if you also have Farina in your team, as this will give you 36 crit rate as your HP is being drained, on top of some normal and charge attack damage, instead of the 40% that Blizzard Strayer gives you, where 20% of it depends on the enemy being frozen. So it can be a bit more consistent with a bit of a lower ceiling. Do note that Ayaka does have some conditions to be met to unleash her full potential, like getting a lot better with her premium supports and also having a burst that deals a lot of damage, but that you really have to make sure you're hitting on an enemy, as some enemies can get knocked away and stuff, so you really want to freeze them inside of your burst and maybe group enemies together to let Ayaka get her max value. With that in mind, Ayaka can be a solid DPS and will presumably get a considerable amount better with Escoffier, whose release seems to be a direct buff to freeze carries and freeze teams, with Ayaka obviously being a great freeze carry. Additionally, I also wanted to highlight that Skirk is presumably right around the corner, and just through her artifact set alone, we can tell that she'll probably be cryo and probably synergize with Escoffier. So if you are interested in her and are looking for a cryo DPS, then definitely consider who you like more and don't necessarily feel baited to get a cryo DPS now and then want another one. So just think about it a little. But if you like Ayaka, then you'll definitely be getting stronger in the current patch if you plan on getting the new freeze support. Now moving on for the next characters, we have Ayato and Yoimiya. Firstly, for Ayato, he is an on-field driver who will apply a lot of hydro from off-field and deal okay personal damage, but mostly is there to enable your off-field supports to deal damage from off-field and trigger a bunch of reactions, notably shining in Electrocharge teams, Dendro teams, or basically any hydro-related reaction. With that said, one of the problems with Ayato is that as far as on-field hydros go, there are just better options now, especially with the release of Neuvillette, who is an incredible hyper carry but can even be played in similar teams to Ayato, where even though it's not optimal for your Neuvillette, he's still doing so much that it's better. Ayato is no longer a character that I recommend as much to pull as I used to when he was really just a versatile on-field hydro applier. With that said, Ayato can still do decent. He still applies hydro and deals decent damage. I've still cleared the abyss with him many times, but as far as hydro characters go, there are definitely more meta options now, so he's really just a character that I would recommend if you like him and not so much meta-wise. Somewhat similarly, we have Yoimiya, who's a character that I would only recommend pulling for if you like her and her gameplay. As far as meta goes, obviously there are pyro carries who are at the top of the meta like Mawika and Arlecchino, and even someone like Gaming with his 6th constellation that all can be really strong, especially with supports like Sitlali. With that said, Yoimiya is a character who is mostly single target focused, although she does have some team options that can help with this, with her most popular teams being Vaporize, but she does have a few different options, being able to be played in multiple different pyro archetypes, and also having, I'd say, worse vertical investment potential than some other pyro carries like the ones I mentioned previously. With that said, I do think Yoimiya is still viable if you like her, but not a meta option, not someone I would recommend. She's mostly just a play if you like type of character. Next up for Chiori, she's an off-field sub DPS who will do more damage if you have a Geo construct in your team, synergizing well with Geo characters, or if you have her C1, making her synergize with characters that have a Geo construct or even other Geo characters in general. You'll find that a lot of the times Chiori will be ran alongside either Navia or Shilonen, two characters who oddly enough don't have constructs but are just good Geo characters overall, and Chiori does provide you with a solid amount of off-field damage, being a solid sub DPS that you can use in many different teams. With that said, she is very rarely in a specific character's best team. She's usually just a solid option, but especially with the release of like Shilonen for Navia, Chiori usually is just another choice you can use without really being the best. Outside of that, Chiori can be ran with Shilonen in multiple teams, or once again as just a flexible option. You could also use her with Zhongli or basically any Geo DPS, or as a flex slot in a few different teams. Overall, Chiori is a flexible option if you need a sub DPS, or especially if you plan on playing her with at least one other Geo unit, either in a 2 Geo support core that can flex with a lot of different DPSs, running her alongside Shilonen, Albedo, or Zhongli, or alongside a Geo DPS like Navia or Ito. Chiori is also someone who can get better with constellations like C1 if you don't have a Geo construct, and C2 as well, but even at C0, as I said, she's a solid off-field damage dealer, especially when paired with another Geo unit. With that said, she's not someone that's at the top of the meta or a must-pull by any means. She's just a solid flex support option, especially in those teams with another Geo unit. So if you like her and are a fan of her like I am, then she's someone I can recommend, whereas if not, then you won't need her and can opt for a different support or sub DPS instead. Next up, we have Yae Miko, who's an electro character that can do multiple things. Yae Miko is a character who can be played either off-field or on-field, with me personally enjoying her more on-field than off, as she does usually require a bit of field time to use all of her abilities. She obviously can have electro-infused normal attacks because she's a catalyst, and she can enable Dendro teams, Electrocharge teams, or even Chevreuse overload teams where she can actually be surprisingly strong. She also features in a lot of CHRONICLED's best teams if you are someone who enjoys that character. Because of this, I do think Yae Miko is a character who can have some value, but as far as Electro supports go, especially if you already have a C6 Fischl, there are many other options you can use that can even be better depending on the situation. In fact, as a generic off-field support, Fischl typically is better for her elemental application, damage, and also energy generation, with someone like Auroron or even Yansan also being great 4-star characters that you can use depending on what you're looking for. With that said, Yae Miko can also be played on field, which I think is really nice when you need an on-field driver, and can also be used to great success in Dendro teams or Chevreuse overload ones. Because of this, I think Yae Miko is a character who definitely can have value and who I also am personally a fan of, but keep in mind that a lot of the times there are other Electro options that can be strong, with Fischl, especially at C6, being kind of the best Electro option for most teams as a support. Once again, I want to highlight her synergy with CHRONICLED if you plan on playing him though, as they are two characters who have a little bit of downtime and can complement each other that way. Next up, we have Arataki Ito, who is a pretty mid DPS if I'm being honest. Like, he's decent if you like him. He gets better with key supports and obviously a good weapon, but overall he's pretty similar to some of the other DPSs I talked about, where I'd only really recommend him if you like him. He's a character that you often want to run with Goro and then usually another strong geo support, or you can do Farina plus a healer. You can do Shanyun if you want to plunge, or another good team-wide healer. Shilin doesn't really work if you don't have her C2, and even if you are looking for strong Farina teams with a geo carry, a C6 Noelle can perform great there, so keep that in mind. But Ito definitely did get new supports, even Shiori that he can use, and for the most part he's still capable of clearing content, right, if you build him and his team correctly. But keep in mind that he's not the strongest DPS, as is the case with a lot of the Inazuma era DPS characters. But if you are a fan of Ito or Geo in general, then he is available on this banner for you to get. Next up, we have Kokomi, who's one of my personal favorite characters, but I do want to warn you that meta-wise, we've recently been getting so many strong healers that make Kokomi feel a bit worse overall. Now, she can be used as an off-field hydro in something like a freeze team, although I do believe Escoffier will just be the best healer there, and then you can run, as I said, an offensive hydro option instead. But Kokomi can also be played on field in teams such as Nilou Bloom, other Dendro teams, Electrocharge, or even mono hydro with Farina, or teams with Farina in general, where Kokomi is your on-field healer, and then you run off-field supports that either trigger reactions or just deal good damage, and those teams can usually perform well because of how strong hydro supports and off-field sub DPSs can be in Genshin Impact. With that said, because there are so many good healers now, characters like Shilonin, Escoffier, Shanyun, even Baiju, like a lot of new healers that provide you with a lot of value to your team, as well as existing ones, this makes it to where having another healer on your account may be less valuable for you. But if you are looking for one or are a fan of Kokomi like I am, then there definitely still are a lot of teams where you can use her, especially as an on-field option. I will say though that having a new healer in freeze teams, changing your hydro slot to an offensive one instead, does hurt one of these scenarios where I did like playing Kokomi the most. With that said, if you don't get Escoffier, or if you plan on playing the other teams, like notably Nilou Bloom or any other reaction, or even mono hydro with Kokomi on field, then her teams can definitely still be very strong because of Kokomi's hydro application and team-wide healing. I will say though that she's no longer as high on the pull list as she was even just a year ago. Alright, now lastly, but definitely not least, we have Kazuha. Now, as you've heard me say many times by now, Kazuha is just a really strong character. He is a very flexible support that can fit basically any elemental damage focused team, provided they are of a swirlable element, namely Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro. Kazuha is oftentimes one of, if not the best, flex slots in many teams, where you can use the elemental damage bonus, the resistance shred from the Verdescent Vendor set, and also the grouping that he gives you. His grouping is very comfy, easy to use, and convenient, and he is just incredibly flexible and a part of many characters, at the very least, viable and strong teams. He's also a part of some meta teams, but something I do want to highlight is that while Kazuha is incredibly flexible and great for accounts that want to play many different teams, elemental DPSs, or even just new accounts that are looking to get strong foundational supports, Genshin has been releasing more and more niche supports that tend to do more for a specific archetype or a specific team than the flexible support options. This is something that I think I'll make a dedicated video on shortly, so do stay tuned for that. But with the recent releases like Citlali for Melt, or even Escoffier for Freeze, and someone like Chevreuse for Overload, characters that offer you buffs and even resistance shred if you are playing a specific team, or say only certain elements in your team, or are building around a reaction, this makes it to where pulling certain characters for certain team archetypes that you may be interested in, or a certain character that you plan on maining or plan on using a lot, can be more valuable for you in particular than a flexible supportive option. Again, this is something I'll talk about more later, but in general, I still personally believe that having strong strong horizontal investment supports, characters that can be used in many teams and be really strong, like Shilonen or Kazuha, are still incredibly valuable for your account. I think Kazuha is a character that for a lot of people brings a lot of quality of life and also obviously damage, which I think is very valuable if you're interested in it. Now, I will say though that as much as I have positives to say about Kazuha, I also want you as an individual to see where you will use him and how valuable he is for the teams you plan on playing. If you have teams where you can fit him, value his grouping, and value the buffs that he gives you, then he can definitely be an incredible unit to have that I don't think you'll regret. With that said, if you already have res shredders, or say you're playing carries that don't really need him, or maybe restrict your team building, making you say run only Hydro and Cryo characters, or Pyro and Electro, things like that, then Kazuha may not be as valuable for you. But overall, as far as supports go and value-wise, Kazuha definitely still is a meta character, a really strong one, a very flexible one, and overall the most valuable one here as far as just generic value goes. He's great, he's convenient, but once again, see whether or not he's worth it for you, depending on who you have, as Genshin has been releasing other characters that give you res shred, and there are even other anemo options like Sucrose that, yes, doesn't offer you the same grouping, but still is a really strong character, on top of other, 5-star res shredders like Shilonen, who came out recently. Overall, as far as the characters go though, there are a lot of characters that I am interested in. It's really nice that no matter what, you are getting a limited 5-star, but the value of each of them can vary for you. I'd say a lot of the DPS characters are not really as meta anymore, but still viable, with Ayaka being an exception, especially with Escoffia's release, as I am hopeful that she will be a very strong character with her. Outside of that, Kazuha's the best support here, with Chiori also being great, especially alongside another Geo character. Next up, for the weapons, here's what you need to know. Firstly, cross off Everlasting Moonglow. Don't click on it, because even if you play Kokomi, you can just run her on Thrilling Tales or other catalysts, even Oathsworn Eye if you're playing Electro teams. There really are a lot of options for Kokomi. Thrilling Tales is free, and you really don't need Everlasting Moonglow, which is typically bad for your account and not one that I recommend. Outside of that, a lot of the other options are genuinely pretty good. Firstly, we have 4 swords here that all are pretty valuable. I'd say Freedom Sworn is an incredible weapon. I think supportive 5-star weapons are some of the best pull value wise for many different teams. Freedom Sworn gives you attack as well as normal charge and plunge attack damage as a buffing sword that also gives elemental mastery, being really good on someone like Kazuha, but even other support characters like Kuki, or even characters that can deal damage and scale with elemental mastery like even Alhaitham or others can make use of this weapon. So a lot more characters than you'd think can actually wield the Freedom Sworn, with it being Kazuha's signature. So overall, it's just a good weapon that you can use to buff your team, and even someone like Shilonen can use it. It's pretty universal and pretty strong. Obviously, it's not a weapon that you need. There are other sword options like Zyphos Moonlight or even Favonius that give you kind of supportive capabilities, but for the most part, it's just a really solid 5-star supportive sword. Outside of that, there are 3 stat stick sword weapons. Uraku Misugiri and Mistsplitter Reforged are 2 crit stat sticks that are the best for their respective characters, namely Chiori and Ayaka, with both of them being pretty universal stat sticks on many different characters. You'll see that in a lot of the weapon rankings of DPS sword characters when I show them in a guide will feature both of these 5-star stat sticks pretty high up depending on what they need. Uraku Misugiri will give you a ton of crit damage on top of normal attack damage and skill damage through its effect, with these buffs doubling if there's a Geo character in your team, while also giving you some defense percent. With that said, because normal attack damage, skill damage, and also the crit damage are all mostly universally appreciated on a lot of sword DPSs, this makes Uraku Misugiri a great universal option even for non-defense scalers, on top of also obviously being best in slot for characters like Chiori and Albedo. Outside of that, Mistsplitter Reforged is similarly a very strong and universal sword that will give you less crit damage but a higher base attack. It also gives you elemental damage bonus through its effect, being a great universal option but also being better for characters that can actually stack up its effect reliably, with both Uraku Misugiri and Mistsplitter being solid and universal crit damage stat sticks. Lastly, for the sword options, Haran Geppaku Futsu is Ayato's signature. Obviously, it's the best for him, and because Haran gives you normal attack damage bonus on its effect alongside elemental damage bonus, it's also a great stat stick for other normal attacking sword users outside of just Ayato, like namely Clorind or even Alhaitham. It is a weapon that gives you 33% crit rate and a 608 base attack, which is pretty nice, and overall, all 3 of these weapons are good stat sticks. As far as which weapon you should choose, well, this depends on what character you're going for, as typically I recommend picking the signature of the sword user you're using, or whichever sword is the best for your account or for the specific DPS you're trying to build. With that in mind, I do think all 3 weapons are good stat sticks, and I am especially a fan of the crit damage weapons, just in case you're getting crit rate buffs through an artifact set, or even a passive like Clorind or Kaching's. My personal favorite is Uraku Misugiri because it gives you so much crit damage and a pretty good effect, but Mistsplitter is also really good, especially for carries that can make use of its effect and actually get good uptime on the stacks. But obviously all 3 of them are great, just generalistic stat sticks, provided you can make use of the stats that they give you. And so personally, I do really like Uraku Misugiri, followed by Mistsplitter and then Haran, but again, be sure to evaluate which is best for you and the specific character that you are trying to build. With that said, next up on this list there is Redhorn Stone Thresher, which is another great weapon that is pretty universal. While the effect will give you defense and more normal and charge attack damage based on your defense, which may seem pretty niche, the stat line is 88 crit damage, which as we saw with Uraku Misugiri is just good. Obviously it has a low base attack, which for non-attack scalers doesn't matter, but for attack scalers can be offset by running an attack buffer like Bennett or even Yansan. Outside of that, the effect is really good on defense scalers and great on Ito, and for non-defense scalers, it's still a okay bonus of normal and charge attack damage if you are doing those. And as I've seen in weapon rankings, with even characters that don't care about its effect, the crit damage that you're gaining can be really good if you are getting external attack buffs, like notably running Diluc with Bennett, where Redhorn Stone Thresher can easily be a great choice. I also personally have been using my Redhorn on Mawika because I chose not to get her signature. Now obviously, if I were to choose a 5-star weapon for Mawika, her signature would be better, but Redhorn is obviously the best option for Ito and a solid 5-star stat stick overall that I'd say is one of the most valuable claymores, especially if you don't have like an R5 Serpent Spine you can use on many characters. Just for a visual of this, I did pull up my Navia and Mawika guides, although my Navia I do think I'm gonna make a new one because she does have new teams, but when we look at these teams that do feature Bennett, because these are characters that want Bennett, so keep that in mind, Redhorn Stone Thresher is a great stat stick on many characters, but as I said, there are a lot of 5-star stat sticks that can perform relatively similarly on so many different characters, provided it's just a good stat stick that you should get whatever 5-star weapon is best for your specific carry, and then you can also flex it on other units. So if you plan on getting Ito, then Redhorn Stone Thresher is great, whereas if not, it's a solid option, but I would still probably choose whatever claymore is best or is the signature of the specific claymore user you're trying to build, provided it's a good weapon in general. Next up, we have Kagura's Verity, which again is one of the good catalysts that you can flex on characters. It's Yae Miko's best in slot. It's also really good on characters that use their skill a lot. It's great for Veressa and an on-field Nahida. It's good for a lot of catalysts. It gives you crit damage bonus on the effect, and is just a solid stat stick overall, similarly to the other options that I mentioned. If you want a good weapon for Yae Miko that you can flex on other characters, then Kagura's can be great for you, but once again, keep in mind that a lot of 5-star catalysts can be really good, and even a 4-star like Widsith, which gives you crit damage and really good stats at R5, especially if you can use all 3 of the buffs, or even just 2 if you are resetting when you get unlucky, can make you have maybe already a really good 4-star option for a lot of your catalysts, maybe saving you from pulling for a 5-star. Lastly, we have Thundering Pulse, which is a crit damage stat stick bow that also gives you 20% attack on the effect, as well as normal attack damage. I will say that while Thundering Pulse is Yoimiya's weapon, and it's good for her, and it can be used on a lot of bow users, if you are looking for a more general bow option, then I would say that bows such as Aqua Simulacra or Polar Star being my personal recommendations if you're looking for a really flexible weapon across many characters, but Thundering Pulse can still be good if you're getting it for Yoimiya primarily. Keep in mind though that a lot of these characters can have alternative either 5-star or 4-star stat sticks, so you really should never feel forced to get a weapon. With that said, overall, I'd say this Chronicled Wish is honestly pretty good. There's only one bad weapon with Everlasting Moonglow, so if you do want a particular sword, like personally, if I didn't have Freedom Sworn, I would go for it, and even right now, I'm kind of considering Uraku Misugiri for my account just to have a good crit damage stat stick, and you are happy to maybe get another weapon, especially if you don't have others, then this banner could be good for you. If you want a specific 5-star and are okay with a lot of the other ones, then losing the 50-50 may not be too bad for you, although once again, there is a risk of getting Everlasting Moonglow. And I'm usually not the biggest advocate for weapon banners, so keep that in mind. You don't need a specific weapon to clear. I do think that overall, having no standard characters or weapons here is really nice, and there's definitely some good characters and some mid ones, with the weapon banner actually being mostly really good choices if you have someone in your account that can use the weapon, with there only really being one bad one. I hope you enjoyed this type of review. I'm sorry for the lack of videos recently. I've had some stuff going on, but if you guys like this type of video, I will make more. I'll update a pinned comment if there's anything I want to add. Let me know what you think and your thoughts on the Chronicled banner, as well as the individual characters and weapons that are here, and stay tuned for a ton of guides coming out in the next patch, notably for Escoffier, Aoife, and hopefully some others. Thanks so much for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.